Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time we got a really interesting question from Star Wars News and Memes who asked, "Hey Thor, I have a question about your take on the Jedi mind trick. It's a common take that Star Wars is about choices, their consequences, and their importance. However, the Jedi mind trick is a way to, at least temporarily, seemingly take away free will from someone, which makes it seem more like a Sith power. Using someone essentially as a puppet would be a power that I'm sure would have come in very handy for Palpatine during his rise to power. Is this commonly given a pass due to it being a way to resolve something in a non-violent manner? Or is there something else at play? How can, in a franchise that pushes free will and choices as much as Star Wars, justify giving the good guys a power that takes free will away from others?" And that is a great question that I honestly haven't thought too much about before this. And I do absolutely agree with you and have talked before about how Star Wars at its very core, or one of the things it boils down to, are the choices of the individual and the consequences that follow, both for yourself and others. Star Wars is very much a lesson about how we live our lives and how the decisions we make with our free will can affect the world around us, and sometimes very drastically. And so, yeah, it is rather strange to see the good guys use an ability that is basically a form of mind control, or that temporarily takes away that free will, and in theory could be used in some very nefarious ways, which we'll talk more about in a bit. Though I do think you're on the right track when you suggest that the Jedi, should kind of be given a free pass, because it can indeed be a way to resolve something in a non-violent way, and where, likely or hopefully, no one is going to then get hurt. I mean, just go back to what is arguably the most iconic use of the Jedi mind trick all time, that being Obi-Wan's "these aren't the droids you're looking for," though the "go home and rethink your life" is pretty memorable or quotable or memeable as well. Anyway, you look at that situation and you ask, what was Obi-Wan going to have to resort to if he couldn't convince the stormtrooper by using the Force or a mind trick to just let them move along? He's probably going to pull out his lightsaber and not only harm or kill the stormtrooper or troopers, but he's going to draw a bunch of attention to himself, meaning his mission to get the Death Star plans to Alderaan could be put in jeopardy, and maybe even getting a firefight started in the streets of Mos Eisley. More stormtroopers could show up and start shooting, where even more people, innocent people, could be caught in the crossfire and injured or killed. And so, in that respect, or that situation, you could argue he's doing it in a sense to defend or prevent anyone from potentially getting hurt. He's momentarily taking away the free will of a stormtrooper to safeguard, well, that stormtrooper and the other stormtroopers and everyone there, and for the greater good. Though it should be noted that virtually any time a Jedi uses the Force for pretty much any reason, they're not necessarily taking away someone's free will, but they are changing or altering what would have otherwise happened or taken place, and oftentimes even getting glimpses of the future to do so. However, I'd argue that's what they're supposed to do with the Force. They're supposed to use it in a way that furthers the greater good and tries to achieve or maintain a balance, and sees as few people harmed as possible along the way. They're supposed to follow the will of the Force and carry it out, even if, or especially if, it changes what would have happened had they not intervened with the Force. Because sometimes, oftentimes, some very bad things could happen if the Jedi don't do anything. An example of what I'm kind of talking about here, though slightly different, and it's something I get asked about from time to time, and I've had some lengthy debates or discussions over this one, but it's Watto's Chance Cube in Episode 1 and how Qui-Gon changes or influences the role in his favor by using the Force. And I think I even just got asked about this in a question in the comments recently, and if I did, I'll try to find that one and give you some credit for asking. But anyway, I have seen so many people argue that this is wrong, or a selfish action somehow, or that Qui-Gon messed with destiny or fate or something along those lines, that if the Force really wanted Anakin to go with him, to go with Qui-Gon, it simply would have made the role go in Qui-Gon's favor without him having to act or change the outcome. Simple as that, case closed. But I'd argue that's not how the Force works, that it cannot directly make what it wants happen at any and all times, or people wouldn't have free will, would they? Yeah, sure, the Force has some sway or ability to do or change things. It potentially influenced the midichlorians to create Anakin, that's certainly not nothing. And the dark side can also affect the minds or actions of those who fall to it. but literally everything would, or theoretically could, transpire just as the Force wants it to at all times if it could directly control things. Or everyone and everything would always be at its whim. And so the Force must attempt to act through the Jedi by telling them its will, or what it wants to be done, or what will lead to balance. But the Jedi still have the choice to carry out that will or not. They too still have their free will. The Force cannot control them. All of this would defeat that aforementioned point of Star Wars, the choices made by individuals, if the Force had this much control over things. In fact, I'd argue the whole point of the Jedi is a means by which for the Force to try and act in order to try and help people find their intended destiny or fate, or their true place and purpose. And George Lucas has talked about how everyone has a destiny, if they choose to follow it, which they do not have to do.
We have a destiny if we want to follow it. We live for a reason and must discover what it is.
And so the Jedi are the ones that use the Force to help others try and find that destiny and achieve balance in the galaxy, which is what makes them different from the Sith, who only use the Force for their own personal gain and to destroy that balance with their greed and selfishness. Nevertheless, the people the Jedi are trying to help, they don't have to accept that help and can still pursue whatever kind of life they want. And the Jedi will generally not try to force them to do anything they don't want to do, outside of those subtle mind tricks from time to time, or making you go home and rethink your life, which, when you really stop and think about it, may just be one of the most egregious uses of the Force we have ever seen from a Jedi. Because again, everyone has free will, or should be allowed to live how they want, according to the beliefs of the Jedi, short of being a Sith and being that selfish where you kind of unbalance the whole galaxy. And it's that free will even from the Force itself, or what it wants from you, the destiny it is laid out that, again, you don't have to follow. But that's what makes Star Wars interesting, that it comes down to the choices of the characters, not anything controlling them. Though speaking of that, of the Jedi believing everyone should have free will, there is another huge factor to keep in mind with the whole Watto chance cube role, one that is oftentimes overlooked by those arguing against what Qui-Gon did, which is that Anakin had already had his free will taken away. He was a slave. And if given the choice of his own free will, he would have and ultimately did go with Qui-Gon to become a Jedi, even after Qui-Gon warns him of how hard of a life it's going to be. What Qui-Gon did by altering the role was give back Anakin's free will. He did the most Jedi thing one could imagine, because it never should have been taken away from him by another in the first place. And so, going back to mind tricks now, sorry for the little detour, but all of this could take us into a really, really interesting debate, or down a very slippery slope, about where the line on using such a thing, such a mind trick, should be drawn at. How far is going too far with a mind trick? Where or what would be considered doing something truly wrong with it, even if it's done with a purely good intent or in the defense of others, and even has a positive outcome in the end? Would it have been wrong, assuming for the sake of argument or discussion it would somehow work on him, but would it have been wrong for Yoda to have used a mind trick on Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith, telling him to, go off yourself, and to defeat the Sith and save the galaxy that way? Look at how Ezra, in Season 3 of Rebels, when he is messing around with the Sith holocron a bit, but look how he used the Jedi mind trick, or a sort of upgraded version of it, you could argue. But he used it to take control of the mind or actions of an AT-DP driver, causing him to shoot at and kill his fellow Imperials, and then to have him walk the thing right off the edge of a platform, killing himself. Or so I think we can pretty safely assume he would have died there. Now, you could make the argument that they, the Imperials, were already trying to kill Ezra and his friends, and that the mission they were on was for the greater good. Furthermore, Ezra and company were already going to have to do something about the Imperials in order to escape, and considering they, Ezra and his friends, they were already shooting at them, they were trying to kill the Imperials potentially, and they knew there was a good chance the only way to escape was to kill them. Well, does all that then justify Ezra's action, the use of the mind control, since they were again likely going to have to kill them anyway? And he was protecting his friends and assuring the success of the mission in the process. Or was there something wrong about doing it that particular way? You obviously took away their free will to the extreme. And sure, it certainly felt wrong, or it felt far, far more cruel in a way, more so than Ezra, running across the bridge towards them and that walker. deflecting their blaster bolts back at them and killing some of them that way, and then lightsabering down some other troopers and killing them that way, before then, I don't know, force pushing the walker off the edge and killing the driver that way. Would doing it that way be better or less wrong, even if the end result is essentially the same? I guess what I'm kind of asking here is, do the ends justify the means? And that is a question that perhaps isn't asked quite enough in Star Wars, even though it seems well suited or the perfect place for it, or like it comes up far more often than we might even realize or acknowledge. Our heroes have to do some pretty horrendous things at times, like Luke blowing up the Death Star and killing hundreds of thousands of people in the process. And this is one of the many reasons I enjoyed Andor so much, because it does address these type of questions. It does ask, when has good gone too far to stop evil? Is it okay to become something worse than your evil enemy in order to defeat them? What price is too high of one to be paid for victory? Especially when it has to be paid by sacrificing your morals or your own soul, essentially. Which takes us right back to what Ezra did in Rebels, why it feels so wrong. Because that just feels like something only the bad guys or someone evil would do to achieve victory, and we just know or can feel there's a price Ezra will or would eventually have to pay if he continued down that path. Which is why I think when we see Jedi using mind tricks, it is generally done to avoid conflict or to potentially even save lives, even the life of the person being tricked. And though I don't think a Jedi ever wants to take away someone's free will, even for a second, I would argue most would be okay with having a momentary lapse of judgment and having their life saved than having to be killed by a Jedi. Well, that's going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and weigh in on this very interesting and difficult to answer question or topic. Or you can always just ask a question for a future lightning response video. All you got to do is start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. But whatever you choose to do, leave those comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.